That's fine.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
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 All right. Welcome. So, welcome to China is Not Our Enemy. And we have an amazing guest today, John Ross. He's a senior fellow at Chongyang Institute, Renmin University of China, one of China's most important think tanks. He has been writing on China for 25 years, and you can check his writing. He's been able to report way better on China than most of the Western media. So John had an awesome presentation at the No Cold War presentation like 3 weeks ago that you can find on codepink.org/China, and you can find all the talks. But you need to see John's talk there because he really talks about why we can't let China be our enemy. We have to stop this new Cold War, and that we need to save the planet and humanity. So I'm going to leave that conversation because he's already had it, and take this opportunity with John to take you deeper into China, because he's been living there, he's been studying it. And I keep coming up against, China's not our enemy, and people say, but, and so I'm gonna see if we can expand on those buts. So first of all, John, if you could just take us back to, a little bit of Chinese history. You and I were just talking and about China and 100 years of war on China and how many people they lost. Like, I think that people in the West don't understand Chinese history and what happened to them. So why don't we start there?
Well, I think the logical point started in 1949 with the creation of the People's Republic of China. At that time, China was almost the poorest country in the world. If you take the studies, economic studies, one makes it by Madison, I think there were 6 countries that were poorer than China, places such Mongolia, Ethiopia. According to the conference board, I think there were 8 countries which were poorer per China, that's per capita. But whatever you take, was almost the poorest country in the world. Okay. Now, China is about 3 years away from becoming a high income economy by World Bank into standard definition. This means in a single lifetime, China has gone from being almost the poorest country in the world to being a high income economy. But understand what this means for humanity. Today, 16% of the world's population lives in high income economies only. Never forget that. 84% of the population of the world lives in developing countries. Right, okay. But China is almost 18% of the world's population. When China becomes a high income economy, this means that the number of people in high income economies, with all that means, that is in ability, you don't have to worry about food, you're able to take vacations, you're able to have a cultural life, you're able to go and see your relatives and people, etc. This is going to more than double. What a glorious step forward for humanity. Instead of people going on about this is very bad in China, the whole world should be holding a celebration and then saying, hey, wait a minute, this means it's only 34% as solved. We've still got the other 66%, to get out of this developing status. But nevertheless, what a gigantic step forward. It's also important to understand what China went through to achieve this. China was invaded, starting in Britain in 1840, right? It was then trampled on for 100 years. It was invaded by Britain, France, Germany, United States in various international attacks on China. Then, of course, by Japan. Between 1840 and 1949, approximately 100 million people died as a result of that direct foreign intervention or indirect consequences of that foreign intervention. I did a TV program, one of the year-long, one of these, what happened last year, what's going to happen to next year. And I said to the young people there, I said, you don't know how lucky you are. Sometimes you don't know how lucky you are. China will take its own decision. China will either take the right decision or China will take the wrong decision. But nobody else is going to take the decision of what its future is. But that wasn't the situation for your grandparents. For your grandparents, foreign armies trampling over the country, this wasn't a theoretical question. This was something which happened all the time. And I said this very heartfelt. And I must say that the applause was absolutely stupendous. It was the most deep thing, which I said, and this is something the United States can make a terrible mistake on. 100 million people died for China to escape from its being a plaything for foreign powers. Nothing is going to be kicked around by another country. Again, you take famous phrase. It's probably the most famous phrase in China, which is what Mao Zedong said in 1949. When the Chinese Revolution, what did he say? He didn't say, now the economy will grow very quickly, or now we will create a big army, or now we will take revenge for all the bad things we've done. His words were, the Chinese people have stood up. And what did that mean? It didn't say we're going to be better than it. He didn't say China's number one. Didn't say like the United States. Didn't say United States, you are number one, you're number two, or maybe you're number 50. But, you know, we, the United States, are number one. He just said the Chinese people have stood up. We are not going to be better than, but we're not going to be less good than anybody else. From the point of the economy, from the point of society, from the point of the national well-being of society. And that is the fundamental way that China looks at the world. It doesn't want to fight with the United States. It's not enemy of the United States. From the overall standard of living, it will take China still 20 or 30 years to catch up with the United States. What does China want? China wants to be left alone in order to be able to develop peacefully, and having had very, very great successes, it wants to have some more successes. That's the way that China looks at the world. And you do need a bit about society, its history, to understand that.
And can you talk a little bit about what you mean in its growth? Like, so it's developed, and it's about, you know, it's pulled what, 850 million people out of poverty. But what does that mean in development? Like, what does that mean to a person who lives in China? How has their life changed?
Well, this is the different. It depends where you were in this process. The latest figure of the World Bank is slightly over 860 million. Of course, in the poorest parts of China, it means from a situation in which the pig lived in the house. I mean, I'm not making a joke about this. You couldn't afford to let your animals be outside because they were too valuable, right? Whereby you were literally poverty. When you take that 860 million, this is expenditure of less than $2 a day. This is what the definition of poverty meant, right? Okay, right. That was poverty, and there are a few tens of millions have still got to be taken out of this, and the pledge of China is that this year it will be done. It's very significant, incidentally, for China that this year, unusually due to COVID, it hasn't set an economic growth target. It's unusual. Normally it does. What it has maintained is the target that every Chinese person will be taken out of poverty by the end of this year. There will be zero poverty. Right. Okay. Right. Now, then, of course, if you then go to the more advanced parts of China, because it's in such a colossal country, with over 1.3 billion people, it's uneven. The standard of living of somebody in Shanghai or the standard of living of somebody in Beijing is not terribly different to the situation of somebody in the United States or Europe. That is not true for the whole of China. If you take the whole of China, the standard of living is definitely lower than Europe or the United States, but that's the most advanced. Now, but this is a very uneven process, because as China develops, even in the time that I've been going there or teaching, I started to be teaching there in 2009. You could see what happens at that time. The big thrill for many Chinese people, they're taking their first foreign vacations. Now China's got the largest number of foreign tourists in the entire world, 150 million. It drives the world's tourist industry. Now, but you go on 2 or 3 years, so 2 or 3 years ago, it's different. They're taking their mother and father on their first foreign vacation. Can you imagine? This is incredible. You're looking at people who are 60 or, maybe 65, and it's the first time ever that they're going on a foreign vacation and paid for, by their children. And this is absolutely thrilling for them, right? Or if you take the well-being, one of the most remarkable things in China is the high-speed train system. This has, somebody estimated, reduced the size of the country in practical travel in terms to about 10% of what it was previously. again, let me take the trip between Beijing and Shanghai, because I used to do it very regularly, right? It used to take a whole day. You had to go to the airport, that took you 2 hours. You went through the security, that took you an hour. Then you had the flight, which is about 2.5 to 3 hours. Then you got out the other end, you went through the security, and it took you 2 hours. Now you go to the high-speed train system, which is in the middle of the city, and this takes you 20 minutes on the metro. Then you have to understand the high-speed train system is like a bus, except that the bus travels at 200 miles an hour. So every 15 minutes, there is a high-speed train between Shanghai and Beijing. And therefore, when you get on the train, you've got a PowerPoint for your PC. If you're a nerdy person like me who likes to work, you don't waste the time. You put your PC in. You get food, which is not wonderful, but no train system in the world's got the best food. And you travel, and when you get to the other end, the journey takes about 4 hours. You get out, and you arrive in the center of the city, and it takes you 20 minutes to get to the metro and your hotel. And so this has completely revolutionized things. Or the fact that nobody in China, young people, don't use cash. I have to transfer money between Beijing and London. I went into a bank and I had my translator with me, and she says, the only people in here are old people and foreigners, right? Everybody else is using Alipay or WeChat, etc. The way that I put it, China's a bit sort of strange. In one sense, it's the oldest country in the world, of course, because it has a continuous civilization of 5,000 years. And on the other hand, it's the most modern country in the world. And for young Chinese people, this must be extraordinary. I mean, one of the most extraordinary situations must be to be a young Chinese woman. She's living in this situation whereby, say, she's not using cash, she's moving around at high-speed trains, she's got these freedoms. But I had a very good friend there who said, but you understand, our grandmothers were dealing with the problem of polygamy. And it's a complete change. It's impossible. I think it's impossible for a man to understand it, because the most revolutionary transition in the entire world must be that for young Chinese women. That's tried to convey something of the atmosphere of the situation.
Thank you so much. So one of the other things I hear is that, China is the worst thing for the planet, that they don't care about climate change, and they're destroying the planet.
Well, this is pure, excuse me saying, but particularly coming from the United States, this is particularly ridiculous, right? Firstly, the United States is the only country in the world to have withdrawn from the Paris climate change accords. Furthermore, incidentally, it's trying to wreck them. It's trying to encourage other places, such as, Saudi Arabia or Brazil, who don't dare to formally withdraw, to wreck them. But secondly, also the United States. I mean, the latest data is that the carbon emissions per capita, because don't forget, China's got more than 4 times the population of the United States. You can't make a comparison between the two countries. You've got to have per capita, unless you believe, of course, it's the sovereign right of Americans to emit 4 times as much carbon as China, which I'm afraid not merely China, probably most of the rest of the world's not going to agree with. The carbon emissions per person in the United States per year are 16.5 tons. The carbon emissions per capita in China are 7.5 tons. That means the carbon emissions per capita in the United States are more than twice, in fact, that of China. So therefore, coming from the claim that the country which has pulled for the Paris Peace Accords and has more than twice as bigger emissions per capita as China, that China is the problem in this situation. Excuse me, it's a bit laughable, if you don't mind me being rude. I mean, I know not everybody in the United States believes this, but if you look at it from an objective point of view, this is ludicrous.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the other big things that we get right away when we mention China is their human rights abuse of the Uyghurs and the genocide of the Uyghurs.
Oh, this again is farcical. I mean, it seems the pattern of the United States is whenever it wants to launch a new aggression, it invents a big lie. So therefore, at the time of the Iraq war, the big lie was Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. This happened. This was totally untrue. All right, I'm old enough to have been involved in the movement against the Vietnam War. At that time, the big claim was that American warships had been attacked by North Vietnam in the Gulf of Tonkin. Later admitted in the Pentagon Papers, the memoirs of McNamara and NSA documents, it was a total lie. Therefore, what happened on this situation was in that situation, big lies. Okay, this is a total lie, the situation on the Uyghurs. There's an excellent article by Max Blumenthal, which shows how this lie was constructed by an extreme right-wing fanatic evangelist called Adrian Zenz, right? Okay, just read the article, it's excellent. I think it's on the same, he did a speech on the same thing. But I'll tell you from a macro point of view, the real reality of the situation. In the 40 years from 1978 to 2018, the population of Uyghurs in China went up from slightly over 5 million to slightly over 11 million. It more than doubled. The Chinese population as a whole in that period increased by 46%. So the population of China went up by 46%, and the Uyghur population went up by 110%. Well, for these people who are going about genocide, it's a very strange form of genocide in which the people who allegedly the genocide is taking place against are growing twice as fast as the other people in China. I don't remember that the Jews in Germany were growing twice as fast as there, but it's very simple to understand the reason for this, which is that under the one-child policy in China, which was only recently got rid of, a Han Chinese family was only allowed to have one child, but ethnic minorities, specifically including the Uyghurs, were excluded from this, and they were allowed to have two. The reason is probably because China didn't want to act against the ethnic minorities and it didn't want to be seen against it. So therefore, as a Han Chinese family could only have one child and a Uyghur family could have two children, naturally the rate of increase of the population of the Uyghurs was much faster than that of the Han Chinese. But this is ridiculous to claim this is genocide. Do you remember, I can't remember, what was Hitler's law that said that Jews could have two children for every one German? This is just nonsense. This is the type of thing which is just like the weapons of mass destruction or the Gulf of Tonkin. It's a total lie.
But we hear that there are detention centers that are, holding all the Uyghurs.
Well, this is absurd. Look, the claim that there's 1 million people, if there were 1 million people in concentration camps, you would have thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of satellite photos of them. Every single news bulletin that came on with the United States would have pictures, the satellite photos of these concentration camps. There are no satellite photos of them. Why? Do you think the United States had them, it wouldn't show them? No, the reason that the United States can't show them is it doesn't have them, because these camps don't exist. This is just a lie on the same level of weapons of mass destruction or the Gulf of Tonkin, and people should understand that. There are some other serious things one can discuss in China, but this Uyghur thing is completely farcical.
Thank you. So you work at a think tank in China. Can you, what is that like to work in a think tank in China?
It's very strange enough. It works more or less the way you think it should, which is, okay, what's my view? Obviously, I've been writing on China's economy for 25 years. So by Western standards, I have very good knowledge of China's domestic economy. But I can tell you there are quite a significant number of people in China, included in my institute, who have a better knowledge of China's domestic economy than I do, right? On the other hand, I've got a good knowledge, because I've written on it a lot, on the international economy, and therefore China's connection with the world economy. So therefore what happens is sort of interaction with, I've got something to bring to the table, which they don't have in the same way. They bring things to the table. That's it. And therefore we both benefit out of this. I mean, they've been employing me now for, this will be 7 years. So therefore they must be getting something out of it, and I'm getting something out of it. There's another way of putting it. You can ask, that's the formal way of working, right? But let me also explain to you what there's a sort of informal aspect to it, right? Which is, you have to say China's character is so different to the way the Western one, all this stereotype thing's ridiculous. Let me give you a thing, because firstly, the Chinese are mad on karaoke. And therefore, a big social thing we have is people go to karaoke. This is difficult for me because I can't sing in Chinese now, as you can understand, right? But everybody else, you go to these massive karaoke places in which, you know, everybody has somewhat too much to drink and a lot of eating, and they have karaoke, which goes on for hours and hours and hours. I can't even stay till the end, right? Including the executive dean, who's actually got a really rather good voice. Another thing which is delightful, there is a Chinese tradition, which is after, say, when you've organized a big conference, you know, 3 days, everybody's been preparing for 2 months to have a 3-day conference, etc. People have a dinner afterwards. But there's a Chinese tradition, which is many people put on what you would call their little acts afterwards. You have groups of 3 people who do funny shows, or they sing songs, or they play Beethoven's Ode to Joy on a harmonica, or things of this type. And the tradition, you go out the front and you do these types of things. So it's true that in some ways China is a formal country. There's no doubt. I could tell you some funny stories about that. It's had imperial courts for 2,200 years in which there were endless degrees of officialdom. So when the Chinese want to be formal, they can outdo almost anybody else in want to be informal. But when
the British,
the British are amateurs. If you had time, I could tell you very funny stories about this. Do you want to hear a story about this?
No, go back to finishing
right. Okay, no, okay. But then when you go to the things afterwards, you know, everybody doing their acts, and then you've got strange games whereby you keep folding up pieces of paper, and you've got to stand on these pieces of paper, and everybody gets closer and closer and closer. It's about the most relaxed thing that you can possibly have. Or another thing, I happen to be a big fan of a Chinese singer called Li Yuchun. It's very interesting because she's not at all a conventional, doesn't present herself as a conventional Western, you know, stereotypical thing. She had very short hair. She has big fan amongst young women, right? Her fan base, I would say, is 14 to 30-year-old young women. I worked with her because when I was running London's economic policy, she came, and I had great deal of respect for her because she was a very nice person. Again, let me give you another little story. Right, she's very famous, and we went and did a show with Girls Aloud, which is a famous British pop group, right? Okay, and we had a photo shoot up on the a roof. When we were going down off the roof, the alarm bell went in the lift to say there's too many people in the lift, right? And it was totally instinctive. It's why I liked her so much. She just stepped out of the lift. It was no, you know, I am a great big famous person. You know, somebody else can get out the lift. She was by the door, and I'm fine. I'm by the door. I'll just get out the lift, right? And which is another reason, you know, that I like her very much. It was amazing going to concerts. One of the things I like to do in China is I like to go where there are no foreigners, because say you feel China. Okay, this is say 14 to 30-year-old core young women, right? Okay, so you go to a concert. I mean, she has enormous, you know, the audience is 10,000, 15,000 people, right? You know, and I boop out 2 foreigners, right? And it's so funny because, of course, so famous, they take over all the gents' toilets. and it's slightly embarrassing. Why are they going to have? There's so few men there. Why should they be waiting? You know, to go to the loo. So I have to sort of sneak in and in a rather discreet way and all that type of thing. It's hilarious. So all this presentation of China as some very regimented place is completely ludicrous.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. Helena Coban asks, I'd like to ask you about your view of the Thucydides trap versus, as Richard Falk says, the Clausewitz trap.
Could you? I know the Thucydides trap. What is the Clausewitz trap?
I don't know. We'll wait till Helen types that in and go back to another question of mine. So one of the things that I am really impressed with about China, and you said it earlier when you were talking, is their concern with the well-being of people, and not just the people of China, but the well-being of people in the world. And you hear that concern from just the people you're talking to in the street to you hear it in the politics. And we in the United States, 65% of our tax dollars is invested in war, and that's not true in China. And they, what are the things that you see the Chinese are much more interested in investing in? I mean, I'm always impressed at how much they invest in scientists in a country where science doesn't seem to matter, in the United States less and less. What are some of the things you're surprised that they are looking at investing in? You talked about the train system.
Oh well, it's the education. It's incredible. It's one of these cases, one of these cases where you're put in your place. When I was running London's economic policy, I was doing a talk, and I said, if you look at what happens when a country is very poor, people spend the great majority of their income on food and housing. And I said, but as China gets richer, fortunately, they are beginning to spend their money on going on vacations, going out in the evenings, and more on clothes. So I said, oh, well, how different China is. People want to have a good time and look good. And somebody came and said, no, that's not true in China. They said, you miss out how much is spent on education. And I felt it's one of those cases, oops, I have now got it wrong. I better learn this, right? And this is true. In addition to the school systems and the education system, the amount of education, the money that is spent by the parents on education of children is incredible. Also, the Chinese, you've got to understand what it's like being a Chinese university. The first day I went I was teaching at university in Shanghai. I was told that I had 2 people assigned to me to help me with research, and I could get hold of them and ask them for something. Right? I wanted some data actually on the trade of Singapore, so I rang them at 9 o'clock. That turned out to be the first mistake because they'd started work at 8 o'clock. Okay. And I asked, for the data on Singapore's trade with the United States, trade with China. Okay, I was pleased. I would have been pleased to get the answer the next day. I would have become slightly not annoyed, but the day after that, at 9 o'clock, the answer came back at 1 o'clock. So the work ethic is absolutely astonishing there, and that was a thing. I mean, the amount, it's how much. The amount of investment that the parents put into their children's education is really astonishing, right? And therefore, of course, China's now getting incredible developments in research and development. I mean, why is Trump trying to ban Huawei? Because Huawei is more efficient than an American telecommunications company. Why is Trump trying to steal TikTok? Because it's better than the American companies, right? So therefore, that's just going to be developed more and more in science. Let me read what this is.
Well, yeah, I think you just basically answered her question, which is that China is more interested in investing in the soft power in the education instead of in the military hardware.
Yeah,
so you just basically answered her question with the education piece.
I can do it a little bit more. I mean, in a certain sense, while we talk about a new Cold War, I would say in a certain sense, this is the reverse of, in one way, of the previous Cold War. What was in the struggle between the Soviet Union and the United States? The United States was very strong economically, and the Soviet Union was very strong militarily, almost equal to the United States, but it was never anything able to match it economically. China's economy is more efficient than the United States. Don't have any illusions. The reason that Trump does not want peaceful competition between China and the United States is, given the difference between China's socialist economic system and the US capitalist system, if there is peaceful economic competition, China will win. It's simple, right? And you already see this. Therefore, the great danger to the world, if maybe this refers to the clouds of its troops, is that the United States still maintains military supremacy. Therefore, the big danger is that the United States will try to shift all conflicts onto the military level. Now, this determines China's military policy. China is not trying to be the military equal of the United States. What it does, unfortunately, it has to have very sufficient military power that not even the most crazy American neocon wants to have a hot war with China. That's what it does. That's what it maintains as military budget. It's not trying to keep the one of the question in the United States. We are entering a dangerous period, let's say about the next 10 years, in which the great danger is that the United States will make some desperate last attempt to maintain its position using military power. I think this can be avoided. That is why I think the Thucydides trap can be avoided, basically because people in the United States don't want to die. I mean, don't have any illusions about it. I mean, if there is a war between China and the United States, the great majority of people in the United States are going to die. It's simple. It's not. I don't like to use such phrases, but this is the reality of the situation, right? Okay, and therefore, I think that as people have a very strong desire to stay alive, they will prevent such military action taking place. Doubtless not without struggle, not without conflict, not without necessary campaigns. But I don't believe that a military conflict between the United States and China is inevitable. I don't believe the Thucydides track is inevitable. And in this, I've now learned something from this discussion about the clouds of its trap. No, China is not trying to proceed by military power either.
So before we have to let you go, here we are. We're inside of the United States. We're activists inside of the peace activists inside of the United States, and we, from the beginning of CODEPINK, we were a group of women that showed up in Washington D.C. as Bush was frightening the American people with code orange, red, and yellow. We called code pink, and here we are again with the threats that are lies that could be driving us to something that's quite frightening if it were to play out, as you've said. So how can people in the United States become smarter about China in the way that they want to be open to and friends with and cooperate with? I mean, if China wants to be the great cooperator, how can we serve that? How do we learn more? And because I'd like to hear your opinion, like, what's it like for a Chinese person on the internet? How much do they know about the United States? And how do we start some kind of people's peace that undermines this Cold War that's already begun?
Well, to answer your question, if you'll excuse me from about sounding rude, but the average person on the internet in China knows about 50 times as much about the United States as the person in the United States knows about China. This is the honest truth, right? Okay. The China one is that is by people campaigning to have contact with China. There was a rather nice little thing which happened. There was a spontaneous attempt when there was the first glimmerings of the new Cold War, which was quite a lot of several hundred Chinese people launched a campaign to go on Twitter to try to get in communication with the United States. Many of their accounts, incidentally, were immediately suspended by Twitter because they wanted to try. They had the idea to try to explain what was happening in China to people. It was perhaps a slightly naive thing to do, and a lot of the accounts were shut down. And I was interviewed about that. I said, and they were a bit demoralized by this. We tried to do this. And I said, don't. You should have the opposite. If you had no effect at all, your accounts wouldn't have been shut down. Because what the United States and people like Twitter want to do is say, look, oh, we're very free. We have all this free discussion, et cetera, et cetera. And they will maintain that as long as they believe that the people who are expressing it have no influence. The fact that they decided to shut your accounts down actually showed that you had some influence. Not overwhelming. Don't get me wrong. It was marginal. It was not there, but it was not zero. You shouldn't think of this as a defeat. It was a sign of this. This is why what's happening now. Why is all this nonsense appearing on Twitter? You know, X program is Russian state media, and this Y channel is Chinese state media. Why are we not? You know, why is CNN not being declared, you know, American billionaire media? Or why is the BBC not described as British state media if you've got to hang up? Or we can have Fox. Why is it not described as Rupert Murdoch billionaire media, right? You know, why? Because they're worried, because there is a growing number of people, not the majority, I don't want to pretend that, but a growing number of people who don't believe all this that we're told. And that, one of the things that we wanted very much on the No Cold War, and I very much loved, it was genuinely an international event. You know, we had people from China, we had people from the United States, we had people from Europe, we had people in Latin America, we had people in Russia, we had people from Brazil. It wasn't a meeting of one country with a few honorific international people added on. It was a genuine international dialogue. The people of China don't want a war with the United States. They in a sense, they think the American people are protected on one side by the Pacific Ocean. They're protected on the other side by the Atlantic Ocean. Unless somebody is crazy enough to launch a missile war, you know, the American people are perfectly safe. The average standard of living is going to be higher than that in China, not in Beijing or Shanghai, for the next 20 or 30 years. The American people haven't got very much to worry about, to be quite honest. They've got, well, not to worry about from the point of view of China. They've got a lot to worry about from their own internal situation. But that's it. You need to develop the dialogue. That's why, incidentally, the US is trying to cut it off. I mean, you know, like my boss, or you know, the head of the institute, right? He's been to the United States, I don't know, you know, maybe 30 times. They cancelled his visa. Well, why? Because they don't want people to know. I think, on the contrary, it's very important for people in the United States to know the situation in China. And I think it's very important for people in China to know the United States. And it's Trump who's cutting this off. So that's what's the situation. So we just got to do a lot of work.
So I think this is a great note to end on, because you've really given us our task, which is to find as many ways as we can to bring voices from China to talk about China, and for us to have collaboration and connection together underneath all these lies, and kind of share truths. And it's a sad thing that you would say that the Chinese know 50 times more about the United States than China. So I guess we've got some work to do. And I'm so grateful that you've helped us on our way. John, thank you so much. And we'll keep working together to end this new Cold War on China, and stay friends and collaborate to work on the real problems: pandemics, climate change, and getting rid of weapons of mass destruction fully.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much.